We're very close to reaching 1,000 subscribers. Once we hit 1K subscribers, one lucky subscriber will win the latest Apple MacBook Pro through a random lottery draw. Subscribe now. I have spent my whole life not trusting maps, and that is the only reason I am alive to tell you this. Maps lie. I learned that before the world ended. Back when I surveyed county lines for a living and watched a laminated chart insist a river ran east. When I could see with my own two eyes, it bent west. A map is somebody's argument about the world, dressed up to look like the world itself. So when I found the dead man in the culvert outside what used to be Delford, and saw the map folded against his chest like a second rib cage, my first instinct was not gratitude. It was suspicion. His name, I would learn later, was carved into the inside of his belt. A. Vesker. He had been dead maybe 2 days, not turned. Dead the ordinary way, the way that still meant something once, from a wound in his side that had gone the color of old plums. The infected had not touched him. That should have been my first warning. They leave nothing. This one they had walked past, and I did not yet understand what it meant that they had. I crouched over him with my knife out, because you always keep the knife out, and I peeled the map from under his hands. It was drawn on the back of a gas station road atlas, the printed roads showing faintly through. And over them, somebody had inked a route in a careful surveyor's hand. That was the thing that stopped my breath. The hand. I know good line work the way a musician knows a true note. Whoever drew this had been trained the way I was trained. Clean bearings. Distances noted in a cramped, confident script. Landmarks sketched in the margins, a leaning silo, a collapsed overpass, a church with a crooked cross. And at the end of the route, at the terminus where all the careful bearings pointed, was a house I recognized. I want to be precise about what recognition felt like, because I've had months to sit with it, and I still cannot make it smaller than what it was. It was not a similar house. It was my house, the one on Renmark Hollow Road where I grew up, where my mother kept a garden she talked to, and my father fixed radios that nobody wanted fixed. The porch that sagged on the left. The 2 windows upstairs set too close together, so the house always looked faintly surprised. Somebody had drawn it from memory, and they had drawn it right, down to the sagging porch, and they had made it the destination. I did not know A. Vesker. I had never in my life met a man by that name. And yet he had died 2 days' walk from a house I had not seen in 11 years, carrying a map that ended at my front door. You gonna sit there all day? That was Wren. She was 14, and she had attached herself to me outside a flooded pharmacy 3 weeks earlier, the way a burr attaches itself to a sock. And I had not managed to shake her loose, because I had not tried very hard. She stood at the lip of the culvert with her arms crossed, thin as a coat hanger, watching me with the flat expression she used to hide everything she felt. Found a map, I said. Everybody's got a map. Not like this one. I stood, and my knees popped, and I held the atlas out so she could see the line work. Somebody good drew this. She came down the slope in 3 sliding steps, and took it from me before I could stop her, and she looked at it the way she looked at everything, quick and total, missing nothing. Her eyes went to the house at the end. Whose place is that? I did not answer right away. Below us, in the drainage tunnel that ran under the highway, something shifted, a wet, dragging sound, unhurried. I put my hand on Wren's shoulder, and she went still. She'd learned that fast. Stillness, the first grammar of staying alive. In the dark of the culvert mouth, maybe 30 feet down, a shape resolved itself out of the shadow. Slow, patient. A face turned toward us with eyes gone the color of dishwater, and it did not lunge. It watched. Then it took one deliberate step, and its foot found the water with a soft, deliberate splash. "We're leaving," I whispered. "Now, up the bank." But even as I pulled her, I was folding that map into my jacket against my own rib cage, where the dead man had kept it. We did not stop moving until the sun was low and orange, and the highway was 2 miles behind us. And even then, I chose the stopping place the way I chose everything, by the map I carried in my head rather than the one folded in my coat. High ground, 2 exits, a line of sight down the road we'd come. I did not trust A. Vesker's map yet. I want that understood. I trusted my own eyes, and my own eyes had put us in the second story of a burned-out feed store with the stairs half-collapsed behind us, which meant nothing living or dead could come up without announcing itself. Wren sat with her back to the wall and her knees drawn up, and she would not stop looking at me. "You knew that house," she said finally. "When you saw it, your whole face went." I have never been good at being looked at. My mother used to say I had a face like a closed drawer. But Wren had a way of prying that was not cruel, only relentless. The curiosity of a kid who had learned that the truth was usually the thing adults were hiding. "It's the house I grew up in," I said. "Renmark Hollow. About 4 days' walk northeast, if the map's honest." I heard myself say "if the map's honest," and I almost laughed, because that was the whole knot of it, wasn't it? A stranger had drawn a true map to a place only I should know. "So somebody knew you." Wren picked at a thread on her sleeve. "Somebody who's dead in a ditch drew a map to your house. That's not a map. That's a message." I had been trying not to think of it in those terms, and hearing a 14-year-old say it plainly made it worse. Because she was right. A map is a message. Every line is somebody telling you where they think you should go. And this one had been aimed at me with a precision that felt less like a rescue and more like a summons. "Could be a trap," I said. It was the safe thing to say. The infected did not set traps, but people did. I had walked past the aftermath of 3 ambushes in as many months. The living had learned to bait each other with hope. A smear of chalk on a wall, a sign that said "food and water 2 miles." And then the bottleneck, the men waiting with pipes. A map to your childhood home was a very good piece of bait, if you knew whose childhood it was. "It could," Wren agreed. She was quiet a moment, then, "But you're going anyway." I did not answer, which was an answer. Below us, in the failing light, the road we had walked stretched empty and gray. And then it was not empty. A single figure came around the far bend, moving with that terrible, unhurried gait. And I felt Wren tense beside me. But it did not come toward the feed store. It stopped in the middle of the road, exactly where we had left the road to climb the bank. And it turned its ruined face towards our hiding place, and it stood there, not searching, facing, as if it already knew. "It followed us," Wren breathed. "They don't follow," I said, but my voice did not believe itself. "They drift toward sound, toward movement, toward warmth. They do not track. They do not wait in the road, looking up at the exact window where you were hiding." I had survived 9 months on the certainty that they were simple, that they were weather, a thing you read and avoided. And now the rules I had built my whole life around were bending, the way a false map bends a true river. We watched it until the dark took it. It never moved. In the morning, it was gone, and I told myself it had simply drifted off in the night, the way they do. And I did not believe that either. I took out the map again and studied the first day's route by the gray dawn light. The leaning silo, the collapsed overpass. Landmarks I could verify or not. That was the surveyor's instinct in me, older than fear. You do not trust a chart, you ground truth it. You walk to the thing it claims is there, and you see if it lies. We follow it one landmark at a time, I told Wren. The second it's wrong, the second one thing isn't where he drew it, we stop. We go my way. She nodded, solemn. And something in me hoped, God help me, that the map would lie early. That it would be wrong at the first turn, so I could stop being afraid of how right it was. The leaning silo was where he said it would be. We reached it a little after noon on the first day, coming over a rise of dead soybean field. And there it stood exactly as drawn in the margin, a grain silo tilted maybe 15 degrees off true. Held up by nothing but stubbornness and the collapsed barn it leaned against. In the drawing, A. Vesker had noted a small mark beside it, a scratch I had taken for a smudge. Standing there, I understood it was a symbol, a doorway. And at the base of the silo, where the drawing said, there was a service hatch. And behind the hatch, dry and waiting, were 4 sealed jars of water and a tin of matches and a note. The note said, in the same careful hand, you'll need to drink before the overpass. Rest here. You made good time. Wren read it over my shoulder, and I heard her breath change. He didn't know when we'd come, she said slowly. He's been dead since before we found him. How does a dead man say you made good time? I had no answer that did not frighten me. The plain reading was the worst one. That A. Vesker had cached this water and this note for someone specifically at some point before he died, and that he had known the pace that someone would keep, and that the someone was walking his route right now with the sun on the back of my neck. The map was not a record of where he had gone. It was a plan for where I would go. He had drawn my future. I sat down against the cool concrete of the silo, and I made myself think like a surveyor, because thinking like a frightened person had never once saved my life. Facts. What did I actually know? I knew a man I had never met had died carrying a route to my childhood home. I knew he drew like someone with my training. I knew he had cached supplies along the route with notes addressed to a traveler whose pace he could predict. I knew the infected were behaving wrong along this same corridor, waiting, facing, ignoring an unbitten corpse. Drink, I told Wren. And I unsealed a jar and made her take half before I took any. The water was clean and cold, and tasted faintly of the glass. And I hated how grateful my body was for it. Because gratitude is a debt. And I did not know yet what this dead man wanted me to pay. While she drank, I turned the atlas over and examined the printed side, the ordinary roads, looking for any mark I'd missed. And I found one. In the corner, so small I'd taken it for a printing flaw, were 3 letters in pencil, almost erased. Not initials, a word or the start of one. R-E-N. I told myself it was Renmark, the road, the destination, but it sat there in the corner like the first 3 letters of my own name, and I did not say that out loud, not even to Wren. We rested an hour. It was the longest I'd let myself sit still in daylight in months. And the map's confidence was doing something insidious to me. It was making me feel held, cared for. A dead stranger had thought about my thirst before I felt it. Do you understand how dangerous that is, in a world that has stopped caring whether you live? Hope is the bait. Every ambush I'd walked past had been baited with exactly this. The promise that somebody out there had made a plan that included you. We should go, Wren said. And she was right. But as she stood, she froze. and I followed her eyes to the tree line at the field's edge. They were standing among the trees. Not one, 6, maybe 8, spaced out along the shadow line like fence posts, facing us, not advancing. In 9 months, I had never seen them arrange themselves, never seen them still like that in daylight when there was warm meat in the open 30 yards off. They simply stood and watched us drink the dead man's water. And when we finally shouldered our packs and started northeast along his line, they did not chase. They turned, all of them, together, tracking us like the needles of compasses. And then they melted back into the trees in the same direction we were walking. Ahead of us, toward the overpass, toward the house. Wren slipped her hand into mine, something she had never done, and neither of us said the thing we both understood. They were not hunting us. They were escorting us home. The collapsed overpass came on the second day, and it was wrong. And for one clean, bright moment, I was happy. The map showed it fallen but passable, with a scramble route sketched up the north embankment and a note cross at dawn. The concrete holds on the east span. But when we came to it in the gray of that second morning, the east span was gone. Wholly gone. A heap of rebar and slab that no one could climb, as if the drawing and the world had finally, mercifully, disagreed. "It's wrong," I said, and I could hear the relief cracking my voice like ice. "Wren, it's wrong. The map's wrong. We stop here. We go my way." She stood looking at the ruin for a long time. Her head tilted the way it went when she was doing the kind of thinking I could not do as fast as she could. "It's not wrong," she said. "Look." She pointed to the note in the margin again, and this time I read past the relief. "Cross at dawn. The concrete holds on the east span, unless the rains came. Then take the culvert north, 40 paces, marked with a blue rag." I had stopped reading at the part I wanted. That is the whole disease of a hopeful mind. It stops reading at the part it wants. The rains had come. I remembered them, 3 nights back. The downpour that had driven us into the feed store. A. Vesker had drawn a contingency for weather he could not have witnessed, because he had been dead before it fell. And 40 paces north, snagged on a fence wire and gone gray with age, was a blue rag over a culvert mouth. I want to describe to you what it does to a person, to keep being right about being watched. Each landmark that held was a nail. The silo, a nail. The water, a nail. Now this. The contingency for the rain, the deepest nail of all, because it meant the man had not merely known the road. He had known the sky. He had modeled a future in enough detail to root around weather that had not yet happened. And the only way to do that is to know the country the way you know the inside of your own mouth. The way I knew Renmark Hollow, every seasonal flood, every road that washed out in a hard rain. He knew this land like I know it, I said, and the words came out strange. Wren looked at me. Or he knew you. We took the culvert. It was low and it stank, and I made Wren go first with the matches because I could not stand behind her in the dark. And halfway through, where the tunnel widened, we found the second cache and the second note. This one did not say you made good time. This one said, "I'm sorry about the overpass. I couldn't be sure you'd remember it fell in '09. You were young." I stopped in the tunnel. The match guttered. Wren turned to look at me, and her face in the failing light was frightened for the first time since I'd known her. Not of the dark or the dead, but of me, of what was happening to me, because she could see it landing. The overpass had fallen in 2009. I was 11. I had watched it come down from the back of my father's truck, the county condemning it. The slow theater of the crane and the charges. I had never told anyone that. It was not a story I carried. It was a small dead memory in the back of a drawer. And A. Vesker had reached into that drawer and taken it out and written it in a note in a culvert for me to find 11 years later. "He knew you were 11, Wren whispered. "He knew you'd be here. He knew you'd forget." "Nobody knew that," I said. "Nobody living knew that but me." And there it was. The sentence I'd been running from since the culvert outside Delford, standing up in the middle of me at last. Nobody living. The map had not been drawn for a stranger. It had been drawn for me, by someone who knew the furniture of my childhood, someone who had modeled not just the roads, but my own forgetting, and who had died 2 days' walk from my door with the summons pressed to his heart. Ahead, at the far mouth of the culvert, the light was broken by standing figures, waiting. I blew out the match and we stood in the dark, and I understood we could not go back, and we did not want to go forward, and that this too the map had known. We came out of the culvert into a town called Aldous Ferry, and the dead were everywhere, and none of them touched us. I have to make you feel this, because it was the moment my whole understanding of the world tore down the middle. Aldous Ferry had a main street, and the main street was full of them, 40 or 50, standing in the road, in doorways, at the broken windows of the diner. In any ordinary reckoning, we were dead. 2 warm bodies walking into a herd that size is arithmetic with only one answer. I put myself in front of Wren, and I got my knife up, and I picked the gap I would die widening, because that is what you do. You pick your gap. And they parted, not lunged, not swarmed. They turned their dishwater faces toward us, and they shuffled, slow and deliberate, to the sides of the street, opening a lane straight down the center. And they stood in their ranks with their ruined attention fixed on us, and they let us walk through. I could have reached out and touched them. I could smell them, that low, sweet rot. And one of them, a woman, once in the shreds of a floral dress, leaned toward Wren as we passed, and I nearly took its head off. But it did not bite. It sniffed. It made a small clicking in its throat, and it drew back and it let us pass. Wren was crying without sound, the tears just running, her hand fisted in the back of my jacket. At the center of town, where the map marked an X, there was a fountain gone dry, and taped to the dead fountain was an envelope in a plastic sleeve. And on the envelope was written a single word that undid me completely. My name. My whole name. First and last. The name I had not heard spoken aloud in over a year, written in that careful surveyor's hand. I did not open it. I want you to know that I stood in the middle of a herd of the dead, who had parted like water to let me reach a letter with my own name on it. And I could not make my hands open the envelope, because some animal part of me understood that opening it would finish something, would close a circuit, and I was not ready to be known that completely. "You have to," Wren said. "Whatever it is, you have to now." She was right. She was always right, that child, faster and clearer than me. And I have thought since that she survived because she was willing to look at the thing that was actually there, while I survived on maps of my own making, on the story that the world was simple. I broke the seal. Inside was a single page, and it was not a map, and it was not instructions. It was a letter, and it began, "If you're reading this, the route held, and you've forgiven me a little for the overpass. I couldn't come to you. I want you to understand that first, before anything. I tried for 2 years to reach you, and the country kept turning me back, and my body was turning too, the slow kind. from a scratch I never told anyone about, so I did the only thing I know how to do. I made you a map. I have always been better at maps than at saying things. I stopped reading. I had to stop, because the handwriting. Now that I was looking at it up close, instead of admiring its craft, now that I was not seeing a stranger's competence, but a person's actual hand, the handwriting was familiar in a way that reached back past memory into something older, the way a smell reaches you before you can name it. I had learned to draw a map from one person in this world. One person had taught me bearings and clean line work and how to note a distance so it could be trusted. One person had a hand exactly like the hand on this page, because I had learned my hand from his. "Who is A. Vesker?" Wren asked, very quietly, watching my face come apart. "Vesker was my mother's name," I said, "before she married, before she was my mother." I looked up at the dead standing patient all around us, and I understood at last why they had let us through, why they had escorted us, why one had leaned toward Wren and clicked and drawn back. The A is for Aaron. Aaron was my father. I did not finish the letter in Aldous Ferry. I could not, with the dead standing around us like a congregation, and Wren pulling at me, and my own body shaking in a way it had not shaken since the first week of the end. I folded it back into its sleeve and I put it against my rib cage with the map. And I let Wren lead me out the far side of the town, and the dead turned to watch us go. And one of them, I will carry this to my own end, one of them raised a ruined arm as we passed the last house. Not to grab, to wave. The gesture was rotted almost past recognition, but I knew it, because my father waved like that from the porch every time I drove away. A slow lift of the whole arm, hold it up, let it fall. We camped that night in a hayloft, and I read the rest by moonlight, while Wren pretended to sleep and did not. My father's letter told it plainly, the way he told everything, without decoration. When the world came apart, he had been 300 miles from me, on a surveying contract, and my mother with him. They had tried to come to me. The map I now carried was not the first version. It was the fourth. The others abandoned as roads closed and the dead thickened. Somewhere in the second year, my father had taken a scratch he hid from my mother, because he did not want her to spend her last strength grieving him early. He had felt himself starting to go. And here is the part I have read 100 times and still cannot read without stopping. He wrote, "Your mother is not with me anymore, not the way you'd want. She went first, and she did not go all the way, and I could not do the thing you're supposed to do. I couldn't. So she walks, and I have kept her near me, and I have noticed something the men in the towns don't believe. They know me. The turned ones that knew you in life, they don't forget the shape of their own. Your mother has never once come at me. I have walked among them for a year now, keeping her company, and they part from me like I'm one of theirs. I think grief is a scent. I think love leaves a mark on you that they can still read after everything else is gone. That was why they had let us through. That was why the corpse in the culvert had gone untouched, why they stood in ranks and waved us home. My father had walked this corridor for a year as the slow turn took him, for me, like I'm one of theirs. I think grief is a scent. I think love leaves a mark on you that they can still read after everything else is gone. That was why they had let us through. That was why the corpse in the culvert had gone untouched, why they stood in ranks and waved us home. My father had walked this corridor for a year as the slow turn took him, my dead mother drifting at his side, and the herd along this route had learned the shape of him, had learned his scent. And I carried that scent in my blood, half his, And Ren had walked at my side so long she carried it too. Borrowed, the way a coat holds the smell of the person who wore it before you. My father had drawn me a map home, not to save me. He had drawn it because he was dying and he could not come to me. And so, he had done the one thing he could do across the whole ruined width of the country. He had reached out on through paper and made a road that led me to him, and had modeled my thirst and my forgetting and my fear so exactly because he was my father, and had spent my whole childhood learning the shape of me the way the dead learn the shape of their own. He wanted you to come home so he could see you, Ren said into the dark. She had given up pretending. Before he goes all the way. He's already gone, I said. The man in the culvert. That was him. A. Vesker. He died before we found the map. He never got to... But even as I said it, I felt the flaw in it. The surveyor's instinct catching a bearing that did not close. The letter in Aldous Ferry had been fresh. The ink on the caches had not been years old. The notes had spoken to my pace, present tense. A dead man cannot restock a cache. I sat up in the hay. Ren sat up with me. If he's dead in the culvert, she said slowly, doing the arithmetic faster than me as always, then who's been leaving the water? We reached Renmark Hollow on the fourth day in the last light, and the house was exactly as he had drawn it, because of course it was. The sagging porch, the two close-set upstairs windows, still looking faintly surprised, as if the end of the world were a thing that had taken them off guard. My mother's garden had gone to riot, tomatoes strangled by bindweed. But the shape of the beds was there, the shape she had talked to. I stopped at the end of the drive, and I could not make my feet go up it. The man in the culvert had not been my father. I understood that now, had understood it since the hayloft, since Ren asked her terrible clean question. The man in the culvert had been someone my father sent a courier, a traveler, someone he trusted to carry the finished map to the corridor where the dead would recognize the scent of home and let the carrier pass. And that carrier had died the ordinary way. A wound gone to plums, 2 days short of his errand. My father had not known that. My father was somewhere still restocking caches, still writing present tense notes, still walking his dead wife up and down a corridor of the parted dead, waiting for a child who might already be coming, might already be 4 days closer than his last note knew. Somebody's in there, Ren whispered. There was a light in the downstairs window. Not electric, the low wavering gold of a lamp. And the front door stood open the way my father always left it open in summer. Screen door latched, main door wide, the house breathing. I had spent the walk building the version I could survive. In that version, my father was on the porch, older, thinner, but himself, his real self. And I would climb the steps, and he would say my name, in his ordinary voice, and I would be a child again for 1 hour before the world took him. That is the map I drew for myself, in the last mile. And I want you to notice that I did exactly what I had condemned in Aldous Ferry. I stopped reading at the part I wanted. Because when the shape came to the doorway, into the lamplight, it did not stand like my father. It stood the way they stand, the slow list to one side. The head hung a degree wrong, and the lamp behind it caught the eyes, and the eyes were the color of dishwater. Ren made a sound. I put my arm across her without looking, the old reflex, and I could not take my eyes off the shape in my father's doorway. It did not come down the steps. It lifted one arm, slow, the whole arm, held it up, let it fall. The wave. My father's wave. He had gone all the way. somewhere in the 4 days between his last note and our arrival, or in the weeks the courier had lain dead in the culvert while we walked. The slow scratch had finished its work, and the map's maker had become one more shape in the corridor of the parted dead. And he had done what the newly turned "who knew you in life" apparently do. He had gone home. He had climbed the porch he built and stood in the door he always left open. And he was waiting, in the only way left to him, for the child his whole last year had been an arrow pointing toward. "Don't," Wren said, because I had taken a step up the drive. "That's not him. You said it yourself. That's not—" "I know what it is," I said. I did know. I am not going to pretend to you that I climbed those steps, believing my father was still in there behind the dishwater eyes. The surveyor in me knew better. You do not trust the chart. You ground truth it. And the ground truth was a corpse in a doorway. But I had learned something on that 4-day road that I had not known when I found the map in the culvert. I had learned that a map is not a lie after all. A map is the truest thing a person can leave, because it is where their whole attention went. My father had spent the last of himself modeling my thirst and my forgetting and my fear. And that was not a summons, and it was not bait. That was the shape of love, drawn in bearings and distances, the only language he had ever been fluent in. I climbed the first step. The shape in the doorway did not lunge. It watched me come with its ruined patience, and it clicked, low in its throat. The thing you have to understand about the newly turned who knew you is that they are not empty. I know the towns say they are. I know the men with pipes have decided the dead are weather, our meat are nothing. And I believed that too for 9 months, and it kept me alive. But I stood on my father's porch, close enough to smell the low, sweet rot of him, and the shape that had been Aaron Vesker did not attack me. And I do not think it was only the scent of shared blood. I think some drift of him was still oriented toward the door he always left open, and the road his child would come up. I think a map that deep does not fully erase. I think that is why they go home. "Dad," I said. It came out of me before I decided to say it. The shape's head lifted at the sound, that wrong degree of angle, and it clicked again, and it took a step toward me, and I did not move. Wren was screaming at me from the drive, low and desperate. Don't. And she was right. She was doing the thing she always did, looking at what was actually there. What was actually there was a dead thing on a porch, and I was within its reach, and I'd let my knife hang at my side. But here is what was also there, and what she could not see from the drive, and what I have never been able to make the towns believe. The shape lifted its arm again, the whole arm, slow, and it did not reach for me. It gestured behind itself, into the house, into the lamplight, the way my father gestured a guest inside. Come in, come in. The same slow ushering wave he'd given every soul who ever came up that drive. And past his shoulder, in the wavering gold of the lamp he could not have lit, because the dead do not light lamps. I saw the room, the table set, 3 places, a jar of water at each, fresh, the caches I'd been drinking from all week, the same jars, and a chair pulled out. And on the wall, where my mother had always hung the county map my father surveyed the year I was born, there was a new map. Huge, hand-drawn, covering the whole plaster, and it was the corridor. The whole 4-day route, drawn 10 feet across, every silo and overpass and culvert, and the herd marked as small, careful figures. And at the end of it, at the terminus, a house. And in the house, a figure drawn waiting, arm half raised. He had drawn himself waiting for me. On the wall of the home I grew up in, my dying father had drawn the future in which his child finally arrived. and he had put a place at the table and a jar of water, and himself at the door with his arm coming up in the only greeting he had left. The lamp. Someone had lit the lamp. I turned and Wren had gone quiet, and she was pointing, not at the door, but at the side yard, at the garden gone to riot, where a second shape stood among my mother's strangled tomatoes in the shreds of a floral dress. It did not come toward us. It lifted its face, and it clicked low, and it turned and drifted toward the porch, toward the man in the doorway, and it stopped beside him, and the two dead shapes of my mother and father stood together in the door of the house they had made. And neither one came down the steps, and both of them, slow and terrible and unmistakable, raised an arm to wave the traveler in. I understood then who had lit the lamp, not them, not the dead. Somewhere in the last weeks, my father, in whatever guttering hour before the turn finished, had lit it and set the table and drawn the wall and left the door open. And then he had run out of living. And he had done what the ones who knew you do. He had stayed. He had kept his post at the door. He had waited. They set a place for you, Wren said. And she was crying again, the silent way. And she had come to the foot of the steps, despite everything, because she was braver than me and always had been. They're waiting for you. I know, I said. And I made the choice I've had to live inside every day since. I did not run. I did not raise the knife. I stepped across the threshold of my own front door, between my dead mother and my dead father, into the lamplight, to the table set for 3. I want to tell you what it is like to sit down at a table your dead parents have set for you, because I have never told anyone the whole of it. And Wren, who saw, does not speak of it, out of a kindness I did not earn. They did not sit. The dead do not sit. The mechanism is gone. But they came in behind me, slow, and they took up positions my father at the head of the table, where he always sat, standing, listening, his ruined hands hanging. My mother by the stove where she always stood, in the wreck of her floral dress. And I swear to you the orientation of them, the way they arranged themselves in the room, was the arrangement of 40 years of suppers. Muscle deeper than muscle. A map of habit drawn in the body itself, the last thing to erase. I sat in the chair pulled out for me. Wren stood in the doorway with her knife up and her face a war. And I told her quietly, "Don't, they won't." And she believed me, or she believed in me enough to lower it. And that trust is the heaviest thing I carried out of that house. The water in the jar was the water from the caches. I drank it. My father had drawn my thirst 4 days out and provisioned it. And here at the end, there was one more jar. And I understood the whole route now, as a single sentence he had been unable to say any other way. I could not come to you, so I made a road. And I stocked it with everything I knew you would need, because knowing what you need is the only way I ever learned to say, "I love you." On the table, weighted under the lamp, was the last note. The ink was not old. Days, maybe. He had written it in the guttering time, the door already open behind him, the turn already in his hands. It said, "I know what I am by now." I can feel it taking the words. If you're sitting here reading this, then you came. And I'm sorry. And I'm not sorry. I couldn't leave you a father. So I left you the map, which is the truest part of me anyway. Your mother and I will keep the door. We don't seem able to leave it. I don't want you to do the thing the towns would tell you to do. I don't want you to end us. We're not suffering. We're just waiting. And it turns out waiting is a thing we can still do. Set us free some other way. Draw your own map out of here. Take the child. Don't stay in the drawn place. A map is for leaving by, not for living in. I read it 3 times. My mother clicked low from her post by the stove. My father listed at the head of the table, patient as the dead are patient. And I looked up at the wall where he had drawn the corridor 10 feet across, and I saw now what I had missed, that the route did not end at the house. He had drawn it going on. Past the house, out the far side of Renmark Hollow, a thin, careful line continuing northwest into hills, to a mark I knew from childhood. The ridge where he used to take me surveying, the high open ground where the wind ran clean. He had not drawn me a road home to die in the set place. He had drawn me a road home so that I would come and be met and be released, and then keep going. The house was not the terminus. The house was the last cache. The love provisioned. The door kept. And then the instruction in his own dying hand. Don't stay in the drawn place. A map is for leaving by, not for living in. We can't stay here, I said to Wren. My voice did not sound like mine. No, she agreed. She was looking at the wall, too, at the line going on past the house. He drew us out. I stood. My father's ruined face followed the movement, and he lifted his arm, slow, the whole arm. And this time, I understood it was not come in. This time, with the note in my hand and the drawn line running northwest off the plaster, it was the other wave, the one from the porch when I drove away. Go on then. Hold it up. Let it fall. Section 10, 800 words. The hardest thing I have ever done was not fighting my way out of a town, or watching a friend go, or the mercy I have had to give with my own hands to people I loved. The hardest thing I have ever done was walk out of that house and leave my parents standing in it, keeping the door, and not close the circuit the towns would have closed. I have gone round and round it since. The men with pipes would say I was a coward, that the merciful thing, the only thing, was to end the shapes that wore my mother's dress and my father's wave. And maybe they are right. I have lain awake inside that maybe for a long time, but my father, in the last clear hour he had, with the turn already eating his words, had asked me not to. Not because he was confused, because he had watched them for a year, walked among them, kept my mother near, and he had decided that whatever they were now, they were not in pain, and that ending them would be for me, to close my own wound. And he did not want me to buy my peace with that particular coin. Set us free some other way, he wrote. And I think I understand at last what he meant. I think he meant, don't carry us as a horror, carry us as the map. Let the truest part of us, the attention, the provision, the door kept open, be the part you take with you, and leave the rotted shapes to keep their post, since keeping a post is the last thing love could still do with those bodies. So I did not raise the knife. I gathered the last jars of water and the matches and the atlas with the corridor drawn on its back, and I took the great wall map down as best I could, folding the plaster's paper skin where it had been pinned, so I could carry the line that ran northwest. And Wren helped me, silent, her war finished, her face gone to something older than 14. My mother clicked from the stove. My father listed at the head of the table. Neither followed us to the door. They did not seem able to leave it, just as he'd written, bound to the set place, the drawn place, the home. And I have thought since that this is the real reason a map is for leaving by and not for living in. Because you can love a place so much, you can no longer leave it, even after you have stopped being able to live in it. My parents had become that. The house had them. The set table had them. They would keep the door until the bodies failed, waving travelers in, and no one would ever come but me because the map was mine alone. At the threshold, I turned back. I made myself look at them fully, the way Ren had taught me by example. Look at what is actually there. What was actually there was not my parents. But what was also there, in the arrangement of them, in the door kept open and the table set and the wall drawn with a line running out to safety, was the whole of who they had been, provisioned one last time for a child they could not otherwise reach. "Thank you for the map," I said. My father's arm came up, slow, the whole arm. "Go on then," I went on. We walked out of Renmark Hollow in the dark northwest, following the line my father had drawn past the terminus, and the corridor of the dead did not part for us anymore, because we had walked out of the country that knew our scent. And now we were only two warm bodies in the wasteland again, ground truthing a route drawn by a dead man's love. I kept us alive, the way I always had, by my own eyes, by high ground, and two exits and a line of sight down the road. But I checked it now, against his line, and where my caution and his drawing disagreed. I had learned enough to sit with the disagreement instead of choosing the part I wanted. Twice more along that northwest line we found caches, water, a note that said simply, "Ridge is safe." I checked it in 11. Good springs. He had provisioned even this, the leaving, the after. A map is for leaving by. He had drawn me the leaving, so that I would not stay in the grief the way he had stayed in the door. We reached the ridge on the 6th day, and it was as he'd drawn it high, open, the wind running clean. 3 good springs and a stand of hardwood and a long view down every approach. The kind of ground a surveyor's child learns to love before she has words for why. There were people there, not many. A dozen gathered around the springs, wary and thin, and they watched us come up the last of the slope with the flat attention of people who had learned that strangers were usually a subtraction. I stopped at the edge of their sight line the way you do, hands open, Ren beside me, and I did the thing I had never once done in 9 months on the road. I told the truth about how I'd come. I told them about the map, the dead man in the culvert, the silo and the overpass and the culvert with the blue rag, the corridor of the parted dead, the house with the door kept open and the table set for 3. I watched them decide I was insane. I watched a big man's hand drift toward the axe on his belt. And then I unfolded the plaster skin of the wall map, 10 feet of my father's careful line, silo to overpass to culvert to a drawn house to this ridge. This exact ridge, marked Good Springs, checked 11, and I watched the big man's hand stop. "That's Aaron Vesker's hand," a woman said. She had come up from the springs, older, gray, a surveyor's squint to her. I'd know that line work anywhere. He mapped half this county before the roads went bad. She looked at me, and something moved in her face. "You'd be his girl. He talked about you, said he was going to get a map to you if it was the last thing his hands did." "It was," I said. I will not pretend the ridge was the end, or that it was a settlement, or that we lived happily, whatever that would even mean now. It was high ground with good springs and a dozen wary people, and it became, slowly, over that first hard winter, something more, because I had a skill the ridge needed. I could read the country. I could ground truth a route, chart a safe water run, draw a road that meant it. My father's trade passed into his daughter's hands, drawn out of me by 4 days of following his line. But I did not draw maps the way he drew them. That is the thing I have carried out of Renmark Hollow, the thing that is either wisdom or damage. I have never been sure which. My father drew a map so perfect it became a place you could live inside. He modeled my thirst and my forgetting and my fear so exactly that following his line felt like being held And I have come to believe that the perfect map is a kind of trap, that a road drawn so completely for you leaves you nothing to decide. And a person who decides nothing is not fully alive, only escorted, the way the dead escorted me down the parted street. So when I draw for the ridge, I leave gaps. I mark the springs and the high ground and the known dangers, and then I leave the last mile blank. And I make the walker choose. Look at what is actually there. Ground truth it yourself. Do not trust my chart. Trust your own eyes against it. A map is for leaving by, not for living in. And it is also, I have decided, for leaving unfinished, so that the one who walks it stays awake. Wren learned the trade beside me. She was better than I was inside a year. Faster, clearer. The way she was faster and clearer at everything. And when she drew, she left the gaps naturally, without being taught. Because she had always been the one willing to look at the thing that was actually there, instead of the thing she wanted. She is grown now. She draws the water runs for 3 settlements along the ridge line, and she leaves the last mile blank. And she does not know that when I watch her fold a finished map into her jacket against her rib cage, where a dead man once kept his, I have to look away. I never went back to Renmark Hollow. I know they are still there, if the bodies have held my mother by the stove, my father at the door, keeping their post, waving in a traveler who will never come. Because the map was mine alone, and I have burned every copy but the one that runs off the far side of the wall, northwest, out, away. I have thought a great deal in the years since about why the dead who knew you go home. The towns will tell you it is nothing. Residual paving, one of the doctors on the ridge called it. Before he died, the body drifting along its most worn grooves, the way a river returns to its old bed after a flood. The house you lived in for 40 years is the deepest groove a body can wear. So they go home. There is no love in it, the doctor said. There is only the erosion of habit, the last channel the water finds. Maybe. I am a surveyor's daughter, and I respect a clean explanation. But I sat at that table, and I watched my father's ruined arm come up in the exact grammar of his living wave. Come in for a guest. Go on for a leaving. And I watched him gesture me toward a table he could not have set as a corpse, and a lamp he could not have lit with dead hands. Which means he set it and lit it in the last living hour, with the turn already in him, already knowing what he was becoming, already provisioning the door for the daughter he could not otherwise reach. And I do not think that was residual paving. I think that was a man drawing his last map. And the map was the house itself, arranged as a message. Here is where I waited. Here is your place. Here is the line out. I have decided it does not matter which is true. That is the other thing the ridge taught me, or the road did. My father wrote that a map is the truest part of a person because it is where their whole attention went. And whether the shape in the doorway loved me or only eroded toward me along the deepest groove of 40 years, the attention was real. The provision was real. The door kept open was real. You do not have to solve a person to be arrived at by them. Wren asked me once, years in, why I never gave the shapes their piece. Why I left my parents to keep a door in an empty house instead of doing the merciful thing. She asked it gently, grown by then, past the age I was when the world ended. And I told her the truth, which is that I have never been sure I made the right choice, and that I have stopped needing to be sure. The towns would have me close the circuit, end the shapes, close the wound, call it mercy. And maybe that is the braver reading, and I'm a coward for leaving them standing. I have sat inside that maybe for a long time, and I have made my peace with not resolving it, the way I have made my peace with the gap I leave in every map. Some last miles you do not get to draw. Some you leave blank on purpose, so the one who walks them stays awake, and some you leave blank because you do not have the right to draw them, because they belong to the dead who kept the door. I did what my father asked. He asked me not to end them, and to set them free some other way, and to draw my own map out. And I have come to understand, set them free some other way, as the whole instruction of my life since. I could not free my parents from the door. The house has them, the way love that outlives its own capacity to leave has all of us in the end. But I could refuse to be kept by the same door. I could take the truest part of them, the attention, the provision, the line drawn out the far side of the wall, and I could keep walking. And I could teach a girl to draw maps with the last mile blank, so that no one who follows my line ever mistakes a road for a home. That is the freedom I could give them. Not an ending, a leaving. I carry them by leaving well. The infected still part for me, sometimes in the old corridor, if I ever drift near it, though I never do on purpose. The scent is fading as the years thin my father's blood in me, but it lingers. The last time I passed within a mile of Renmark Hollow, running a water route gone wrong. A single shape came out of a tree line and stood in the road, and turned its ruined face to me and did not advance. It lifted an arm. Slow, the whole arm. I did not go to it. I lifted my own arm back. Go on, then. And I turned northwest, and I walked out, the way I was drawn to. There is a thing I have not told you, because I have not known where in the telling it belonged. And it belongs here, at the end, where the map runs off the edge of the paper. When I took the great wall map down in my parents' house, folding the plaster's paper skin, I found something pinned beneath it, against the wall itself, hidden by the drawing. It was the first map, not the fourth, the finished one. The one drawn so perfectly it became a place. The first. Drawn in the earliest days of the end. 300 miles away. When my father first understood he could not reach me and began the long work of reaching me anyway. It was a wreck, crossed out, redrawn, roads marked closed and reopened and closed again. The line work shaky in a way I had never seen from his hand, because it was drawn in fear. Drawn by a man learning in real time that the country between him and his child was becoming impassable. There were notes on it, and the notes were not the calm, present-tense instructions of the finished route. They were a father talking to himself in the dark. She'll be all right. She's smart. She's careful. She doesn't trust maps, thank God. She doesn't trust anything. I taught her that. That'll keep her alive. And later, in a shakier hand, road's gone. Can't reach her. Can't reach her. And later still, the shakiest. If I can't bring myself to her, I will draw her away to me. It's all I have. It's all I ever had. That was the map I'd understood him by. Not the finished one, the perfect provisioned corridor that felt like being held. The wrecked first draft, crossed out and desperate. A man discovering that his whole life skill, the drawing of true roads, was the only love he had left, and that it might not be enough. The finished map was the performance. The first draft was the person. And I understood, holding both, why the finished one had frightened me so badly on the road. A finished map, a perfect one, hides the drawing. It shows you only the confident line and hides the 100 crossed-out fears that produced it. That is why following it felt like a summons, like a trap, like being known too completely, because a perfect map erases the person who sweated over it and leaves only an uncanny competence. A hand that knew your thirst before you did. It felt like being hunted because it had been sanded free of the fear that made it love. The first draft gave him back to me. All the crossing out, All the can't reach her, can't reach her. The finished corridor was what a dying man could make of himself for his child. The wrecked first draft was what he actually was. Afraid, insufficient, and drawing anyway. I keep the first draft. The finished one I gave to the ridge, and they use it still. The water sources marked, the high ground noted. But the first draft I keep against my own rib cage, folded where the dead courier kept it and my father intended it, and where I have carried it every day since, because it is the truest map I own. It is a map of a person failing to reach someone and refusing to stop trying. It has no destination that holds. It is all leaving, all attempt, all the road, and none of the arrival. Wren knows I carry it. She has never asked to see it. That is the kindness I did not earn, and have stopped trying to deserve. She simply lets me keep the one thing I cannot ground truth, cannot verify, cannot leave a gap in. The one map I live inside, despite everything I preach about maps being for leaving by. I am allowed one. I have decided a person is allowed to live inside exactly one map, the wrecked, honest, first draft record of someone who could not reach you and drew a road to you anyway. That one you keep. That one you carry against the rib the whole rest of your walking life. Every other map you leave the last mile blank, and you hand it on, and you let it go. But the first draft of the person who loved you, crossings out and all that one, is not for leaving by. That one is for keeping. That one is the door you get to keep open, in yourself, without it trapping you. Because it does not point to a place. It points to a person, failing and trying, 300 miles away in the dark, saying to himself, she doesn't trust maps, thank God. That'll keep her alive. He was right. It did. The ridge is a real place now. I should tell you that before I finish, because I have spent so long inside the dead and the drawn that I owe you the living. There are 40 of us. There are children who were born here and have never seen a city, never seen a herd. And I draw them maps of the water runs with the last mile blank, and I make them fill it in themselves. And they groan at me the way children groan at a teacher. And they do not understand why the old surveyor woman will not just draw the whole road. I hope they never understand. I hope the not understanding lasts their whole lives. It means no one drew them a corridor so perfect they forgot to keep their own eyes open. It means no one loved them into a trap. Wren runs the ridge now, more than I do. She is not called Wren to the children. She has a grown name, a used name. But to me, she is the burr that attached itself outside a flooded pharmacy and would not shake loose. The 14-year-old who looked at what was actually there while I looked at what I wanted. Who stood at the foot of my parents' porch with her knife up and lowered it because she trusted me past all sense. She is the reason I can end this without it being only grief. Because the map led me home to the dead, yes. But I did not walk that corridor alone. I walked it with a living child at my side, borrowing my father's scent in her borrowed coat, protected by a dead man's love that had soaked into me deep enough to shelter her too. That is the part I did not understand until years later. And it is the part I most want to leave you with. My father drew a map to reach one person, me. But love drawn that deep does not stay aimed. It spills. It sheltered Wren, who my father never met and never knew existed. The corridor of the parted dead let her through because she smelled of me, and I smelled of him. And so a man dying 300 miles from his daughter reached out through paper and habit and the last grooves of his ruined body, and without ever knowing it, kept a stranger's child safe. Love drawn that deep provisions people it was never drawn for. I think that is the only afterlife I believe in now. not the shapes keeping the door, those are habit, or love eroded to habit. And either way, they are ending. The bodies failing season by season. And 1 year, I will pass the corridor, and no one will come out of the tree line to wave. And I will know the door is finally empty. That is not the afterlife. The afterlife is Ren, alive, drawing maps with the last mile blank, sheltered as a child by a love that was not even aimed at her. The afterlife is the children on the ridge who will never understand why the road stops short. The afterlife is the spill. I did not save everyone. I want to be honest. At the end, the way my father's first draft was honest. I have lost people on the water runs. I have drawn roads that meant it and watched them fail anyway. Watched the country lie in ways I could not ground truth in time. I keep no count of them, because a count is a kind of map with no gaps. And I have learned to leave the gaps. But I carry the faces. That is different from a count. A count is arithmetic. Faces are the first draft. The honest wrecked record, crossed out and grieved and drawn anyway. The last thing my father wrote to me, under the lamp, on the table set for 3, was, "Don't stay in the drawn place." I have tried to obey him every day. I have tried not to stay in the grief or the guilt or the perfect corridor that felt like being held. I have tried to keep the last mile blank in my own life, to stay awake in it, to decide instead of being escorted. I have not always managed. The first draft against my rib is proof that I stay inside one map, despite all my preaching. But I leave it there, and I keep walking. And that is the most I know how to do. A map is for leaving by, not for living in. I have left by it. I am still leaving by it. Northwest, out, away with the wrecked first draft against my rib, and a grown girl running the ridge and children groaning at the blank last mile. And somewhere behind me, in a house with the door kept open, 2 shapes I loved, keeping their post, waving a traveler on. Go on then, hold it up, let it fall. I passed Renmark Hollow one last time this spring, closer than I meant to, a water run gone wide. No one came out of the tree line. No shape stood in the road. The corridor did not part, because there was nothing left along it that knew my scent. The bodies had failed at last. The door finally, wholly empty, and the country between me and my childhood had become only country again, honest and unremarkable and unhaunted. I climbed the drive. I made myself. The porch had fallen the rest of the way. Inside, the table was still there, canted where the floor had rotted. 3 places still set. 3 jars long gone to dust and glass. The great wall map was faded to a ghost, but I could still see the line running off the far side, northwest, out. And I understood that I had spent my whole life since walking exactly the road he drew past the terminus. I did not weep. I have done my weeping in gaps, over years, the way you should. I set a 4th place at the canted table, Ren's place, though she was not with me, because I wanted the drawn house to hold. For 1 more hour, the shape of a family that included the child, a dead man's love, had sheltered without ever knowing her name. Then I obeyed him 1 final time. I did not stay in the drawn place. I stood in the empty doorway where he had stood, and I lifted my arm, slow, the whole arm, to no one, to the country, to the spill of love that outlives its aim. Go on then, I went on. The first draft wrote against my rib, honest and wrecked and unfinished. It is the only map I've ever fully trusted, because it never once pretended to arrive.